It's about time we made a video like this. Endwalker has reached its end. And finally, it's time to talk about it as a whole, being the first expansion that I had the pleasure of experiencing from start to finish, pushing through the good, the bad, and the ugly, seeing this whole 10-year-old story finally come to a close, and saying hello to new beginnings. It's time that we talk about Endwalker. We will begin with the topic that is arguably a 50-50 for how many people actually care: the story. Who gives a shit? Throughout the story, we explore new places that we heard about, like Sharlayan, as well as parts of Ilsabard, like Thavnair and Garlemald. We learn more about Hydaelyn, not as a primal, but as a person. We hang around with Emmet Selk, Ithlodeus, Hermes, and Twitter before Elon Musk, experiencing time travel, space traversing, and emotional skill issue, I guess. Without going too deep into it, Endwalker is the kind of roller coaster that tries to be as much of a tearjerker as Shadowbringers was, but doesn't really hit the right spot. Sure, we get to see some gruesome and raw moments, but at times there are moments where it feels like they try a little too much. Or I'm just a fucking hard ass, my fucking Overall, everyone can agree that the base Endwalker story is a pretty good wrap up to the 10 years of storytelling that began with A Realm Reborn. Then the patch quests came along and introduced us to Zero, Golbez, the Archfiends, and the 13th as a whole, which didn't last that long because whoop-de-fucking-whoop. Many people may argue that Heavensward did this with the Warriors of Darkness. They had nothing to do with Stormblood, but I will argue that they did in fact play a small part simply because they took Nidhogg's eyes for Elidibus, which were used by Ilberd, and that pushed the story forward towards Stormblood. While with Endwalker, it's just odd. People have lost their loved ones due to not being able to control their emotions. They saw disgusting beasts come out of their peers and familiars. It truly felt like the end times, but after defeating the Endsinger, people are just recovered? And suddenly we get the urge to do a treasure hunt with Estinian, and you get where the story goes from there. We do a friendship arc with the big baddie known as Golbez, and then we meet with the local chinchilla. It makes no sense after the events of what happened throughout Endwalker. Did our character not feel some form of emotion from Xenos taking control over our body? Did we not feel some kind of mortality after we nearly died? Twice? 3 times even? Probably not. Let's just move over to the other parts of the expansion. The raids. I won't be talking about the story in this regard simply because that is not the focus. The raids in this expansion happen to be the ones that I will hold dear to my heart because it was my first ever time to raid in the game. Asphodelos was the first time I raided with a full static, which didn't last that long. We did the first raid and that was it. But from seeing other people's perspectives and their runs, I would say that Asphodelos was quite the normal raid experience for anyone. But 4 raids later, we get Abyssos, the raid tier that took the whole community by storm simply because the balance of the game was a bit fucky. Certain jobs couldn't make the cut when it came to the damage checks. Healers became a scarce species, and the fabled tree meme arose. The Proto-Carbuncle is the only fight that I genuinely enjoyed in this tier. Hegemone was boring, and Agdistis was unbearable. Hephaestus was an experience, and was the biggest reason as to why anyone didn't like this part of the raid tier, and was a real wake-up call to how bad the gearing system is in this game. The fact that people had to reroll out of their favorite job simply because it didn't hit the right number no matter how well they played. They realized that they can't quite reroll so easily because they don't have the required item level, because of time-gated things like drops from raids, tomestones, in the absence of horizontal progression. Then we got Anabasios, and this tier was fun. Cocytus had some fun mechanics. Everyone will remember Pandemonium for what it is because of that damn smile. Themis suffers the same way as Agdistis did, and Athena is the reason why everyone has mommy issues. There isn't really much for me to say about Anabasios, besides the fact that it was a solid ending to the whole raid tier. There were some issues here and there, like Themis being a cakewalk up until Letter of the Law, and Pandemonium being an absolute wall to people who are still getting used to the raiding environment. Overall, this was a pretty decent raid tier that I unfortunately cannot fully review simply because of not wholly experiencing every single second of it. Let's move on to the content. Now I can do the same old funny thing by saying there's no fucking content. But the honest truth is that we have been given a handful of content in this expansion. It's just that with how many people paid to play 14, you'd expect there would be more for us to do, especially to keep the new players playing. But I expect that they used majority of their earnings in Dawntrail. Now that we got that tangent out of the way, let's talk content. Besides the things that we expected in this expansion, like the story, dungeons, raids, and alliance raids, we got
Island Sanctuary and varied dungeons
that have
Criterion
and
Criterion Savage,
which is kind of dog shit. We got 2 ultimates. One of them was supposed to be in Shadowbringers. The whole PvP system has been entirely changed as well. Other things that honestly can't really be considered content, like Tataru's Grand Endeavor, or the incredible relic grind called the Alternative Tombstone Weapons. This topic is basically the dead horse that has been constantly beaten by players and creators alike, and it's a natural cycle that any MMORPG goes through. But as mentioned before, this is only because of how many people joined in on Endwalker's release. You would think Squeenix would do anything to keep that retention, but perhaps they are keeping that for Dawntrail. Allegedly. So what did Endwalker do right? It's hard for me to say. They delivered a pretty simple and direct expansion that didn't really do much of a risk. The major risks they took was Criterion, but even then they did it in a safe way. Something that I can hazard as a guess is that they didn't implement massive amounts of content simply because there are so many new players that can do prior expansions content. So to keep new players, they did not want to bloat the amount of things players can do in the current expansion, allowing them to take their time and enjoy the contents that they are able to do now instead of what they can do later. And there can be a lot of different reasons as to why Endwalker ended up being the way it is. Could be because of their focus on Final Fantasy XVI or the continued development of Dawntrail, or whatever is going on behind closed doors that we have no idea about. In the end, this is the first ever expansion that I have experienced from start to finish. Experiencing things like doing content on the day of release, watching the fire of drama happen at a constant before my bare eyes, and of course, burning me out because of drought and overstimulation from difficult content. This expansion was not bad, but it was underwhelming in the long run. The base expansion was incredible with amazing music, memorable fights, and fantastic places that will hold many unforgettable moments. Many contents that had a spark of creativity and well-made experiences. Many other contents that had the same attributes that have been dulled by poor reward structures. And just like the expansion, this video has come to an end. And just like the expansion, you can say the same exact thing. Goodbye.